on a very broad sense, I'm just fascinated by that I am a body, that I'm a living body made up of all these particles, and that...
Welcome to In the Particles, where we gather with our community to talk about the creative process and postmodern performance practices, and explore a perhaps new art movement that we're calling particleism.
Okay, welcome back to In the Particles. I am sitting here, this is Deborah, I'm sitting here today with Floor. Floor says her last name two different ways. For the American ear, Grootenhuis, and for the Dutch ear, Grootenhuis.
Very good.
Yes, I lived in the Netherlands for a brief period in the mid-teens. So I picked up a little Dutch. But Floor lives here in New York City. We're sitting in her office at Hunter College, not office, lab. We're sitting,
art lab.
Yes, we're sitting in Floor's art lab.
It's not mine.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, sorry. Those are important distinctions, though. That's
yes,
why I'm
right.
it.
What do we own, really?
Yeah, and what's mine? And, I don't sit here out of my own accord. I sit here because of all the people that have supported and inspired me and work with me, including you, Deborah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we're sitting in...
It's a shared space.
It's a shared space with your collective,
yeah.
Which is called, again...
The Collective Fabric. It's called The Collective, but we work on a project called The Collective Fabric, the Microbiome.
Yes, so Floor is an artist in residence at Hunter College in a biology lab. Do you want to tell folks what that means?
Well, I guess I would invite folks to just imagine what that could look like. And then I can tell you what it means for me. And I think it could mean many different things depending on who you are. But for me, that means that I connect with the lab and collaborate with them to bring science and art out to other publics in new ways. And what I don't do is draw diagrams of scientific processes or biological models and I have a socially engaged practice, and I'm really interested in connecting and collaborating and exploring with others what would make a difference for both of us. So I learned to listen and ask questions and spend physical time in the lab with lab members, share my time and share their time. I'm in the lab as lab meetings every week, and I participate in those in varying ways depending on how much I can connect with the material that they present. But over the last 5 years, I've gotten to understand a lot better of how the little things in cells work.
It's very exciting. I can imagine there aren't many people like you here at Hunter.
As far as I know, I'm the only one.
You're the only one.
In this kind of position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And outside of an institution like this, how many socially engaged artists kind of join? Let's just start with science labs. Are there others?
I'm not sure socially engaged artists per se, but definitely artists get paired with scientists, and it's usually in a way where the science is inspiring the artists to make beautiful things or interesting things. And it's often a collaboration where it's out of balance because if it's funded or paid for by the scientific group or the research group, it has to be specifically about what they do. So let's say you hire an artist to talk about malaria, then it has to be specifically about malaria. And so I have the freedom to really work on whatever I care about and what I want to do, which is extraordinary. So I don't know that there's anything really like that, because usually with funding and with money behind it, there are parameters that don't allow you to work in a certain way. And it's interesting, but there seems to be some hierarchy, and science is higher than art. And so it's often, the artist that is meeting the scientist as opposed to the scientist being curious about the artist. And I'm really interested to what happens when we both are curious about each other and there are no barriers to how we work, and then something new can happen that we couldn't have even imagined. And that's really exciting. And I'm sure it does happen in occasions with collaborations with art and science, but not in this formal way. As far as I know, I'm one of the few artists that is actually being paid to be an artist, as opposed to being paid from the artwork that I produce.
Yeah.
So that's unique. But the City of New York has a very special program that's called the PAIR program. So that's Public Artist in Residence program that was created by Tom Finkelpearl when he was the Cultural Commissioner of New York City. And
how long ago was that he did that?
When he created those, it was already when I was at Queens College, so probably 2015, 16, 17,
okay,
something
so fairly
like that.
New. Okay.
But it still exists, and it's become longer, and it's really inspired very much by an artist called Mierle Laderman Ukeles, who, I guess, like me, actually, and who is one of my mentors and one of my examples, is still an artist in residence in the New York City Department of Sanitation, and has done extraordinary things with sanitation workers.
And she wrote a manifesto.
She wrote the Manifesto of Maintenance, and, which was really about realizing that as she was at the age where she got married, and she was an artist, and she was playing with all the big, abstract expressionist, sculptural, modernist artists. And they kept playing, and she was having babies, and she couldn't play as an artist anymore, and she had to she was in this world of maintenance. And she then realized the way that I make art is by maintenance, and so maintenance in itself is art, and by labeling it as such or framing it more as such, she turned maintenance into art. So folks who were in maintenance positions, she looked at their performances and their ways as art. But she also took it in a broader sense that if we aren't maintained, we can't make art. Like if we're not cared for, and if we don't care for ourselves. And we do that at a microscopic family body level, but we do that at a macroscopic or like broader level neighborhood, city, and if the trash isn't collected, then we would all get sick. Anyway, so that, so
you brought up the word modernist, and that's definitely something that we've unpacked a little bit on the podcast. So do you consider, because you've trained in the viewpoints, the 6 viewpoints with Sophia and I, and I'm just curious, would you consider yourself a postmodern artist, or would you give yourself another time-based label, or not? Or
definitely part postmodern, definitely. The deconstruction of things and the taking it out of time and space and story and movement. Like, it was so exciting for me to see the 6 sides of the cube of the 6 viewpoints, and then realizing that they can be taken apart and put back together in all these ways, or even relate to each other without being put back together. I can even see that happening. And I think with modernism, that's not present. There is an absolute square, and that's it. That's where it fits in. And it's kind of interesting because science is, in that sense, maybe modernist, because it's their formula of how experiments happen is very specific. So their score is very specific, and is repeated over and over again in the same way, to figure out what's really happening. So for example, if you're running an experiment and you change the temperature by 0.5 degree, it changes everything. But yet, in a postmodernist art world, there's the ability to switch the parameters as you choose, as you see is valid. But I feel like in this day and age, there's something else next to the postmodernist, and maybe it doesn't have a name yet. And I've been playing with, because I work across disciplines, not just in my artistry, but also in who I am. I studied human geography. I have a master's in geography, and then, I worked in all these other things. And so I am interdisciplinary just in the way, even in my art practice, I've always done a bit of sculpture and a bit of, in my methods and my medium.
Yeah.
But I think underneath everything that I've done, there's been this drive of connection and community.
Yeah. Yes. And I would say also, like, when you described what you do in the lab, it sounds transdisciplinary, actually, right? Like the scientists and the artist coming together, and you said something like creating something that you don't even know could even exist because of this. I feel like that's like a transdisciplinary.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I was going to say that I would call myself a transdisciplinary, socially engaged postmodern artist, and there might be another few words just to create this really long, complex phrase of identities. And not to limit. I don't want the label to limit what's possible.
Yes.
So that's why I'm reluctant for a label.
Yeah.
But sometimes labels are needed to understand or to give context or to categorize.
Yes. And I think in one of our previous episodes, we talked about Mary Overly and how she had this like 3x5 note card that said, and I'm gonna forget, but it was something like, I am conservative, postmodern, I don't know, it had like a bunch of words, right, that were sort of strung together so that she could really illuminate how complex she was as a human being, right? That you can't just have one descriptor and say like, that's what I am.
Right.
You could say you're an artist, and then people are like, oh, you must paint.
Yes.
Right? Well, there are actually so many different art forms.
Yeah. That irks me a lot. What kind of artist are you? Are you a painter, a sculptor? And I think the question that I find really interesting is, what is your work about? What matters to you? And it could even be the material that matters to you, so that I could say, oh, I'm a painter because I'm just obsessed by how the colors work and how the pigments work and how, for whatever reason, there's so many reasons to get obsessed with paint or with a medium. So I think that's really valid. But then, for many folks, I think they're saying something else underneath that. Or around that, or I don't know, woven into that. And that's what I think is our job as artists in the broad sense of the word artists. I'm not limiting it to visual artists, but really like musicians, dancers, theater makers, choreographers. I don't know. There's those are the easy ones, but there's so many arts. That's our job, is to figure out like, what is that one thing? I had this fantastic artist writing class, and I'll plug him because his name is Hen Gil Hahn, and he's a Korean artist, and he's really committed to bringing artists together. And his way of delivering is very direct, and I don't think everybody understood, because they thought they were going to learn how to write proper sentences and the right grammar. And he said very clearly, that's not what I'm here to teach you. I'm here to teach you what you write about. And so he asked us questions. And he said, you are an artist for a reason. And what is that? And I think half the class, or more than the class, was like, what do you mean? I paint, like I sculpt, or and people were upset. I probably was upset too, until I realized, oh, wait. And he said, and your art matters, and your art makes a difference. But why does it matter? And how does it make a difference? That's your job to figure out. And that's what your artist statement is. And then your materials fit into that, because your materials aren't random. The things you make are not random. And that was just like, oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that it's about ideas. And there's a kind of message. Mary Overly would talk about that too. It's like, what is your message to the world? Like, what are you saying, right? Yeah. So great. Do you know your artist statement or any part of it? Community connection?
It changes because I think I get new layers of what it is that's driven me. And I think initially I was really driven to be seen, to be acknowledged, and that art was probably the freest way, like the most unanimous way to do it. And I feel like I've reached that stage where if you are an artist in New York and you're making it, like that's one of the highest acknowledgments you can get.
Yes. Talking to Floor that has a full-time position as an artist.
Yeah, and I'm paid.
Yes.
And I have health insurance and it gives me a visa.
Yes.
And I feel like my job description that I co-wrote with my collaborator, Dr. Jayne Raper, who has brought me into the lab, like that's the best art piece that we have created together. And it's still living.
Yes.
And she said to me, science takes time. And, what I see the folks in the lab doing, they're repeating and repeating and they're making mistakes, but those are the best learning moments. And so she understands, and she understood more than I understood that you have time.
Yeah.
Take the time.
Yes.
Which in our current world, we time is this scarcity. But yet time can be rubber. Time can expand and compress.
Mm-hmm. Mary would often say about artists, like, we're not instant soup packets. Right? It's not just like add water and all of a sudden you have something, right? It does take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just do this little intervention. So the podcast is called In the Particles. What does that mean to you?
Every week at lab meeting I learn about particles, and I see the lab wrestle with the particles of particles of particles. And just to be clear, the lab that I work in studies a parasite called the trypanosome, the African trypanosome. And we as humans are immune to the sickness that they cause. And we have a specific protein on one of our genes that protects us, and the protein is called ApoL1. And if we are infected by the trypanosome, the ApoL1 in our blood is able to enter the trypanosome's membrane, and it swells and bursts, and then you would say it dies, but what really happens, it turns into millions of little particles I don't know if it's millions. I don't know the quantity, right? Depends on what metric you're talking in, because I've learned you have all sizes of particles, and they talk about I don't even know. Anyway, it's far beyond inches and centimeters and millimeters. It's much smaller than that. Mm-hmm. But they get taken up, they get digested by our cells. And I think that is already, those are the ways that I look at particles on a micro level. Mm-hmm. And then learning that, each gene is made up of proteins, and each of those proteins is made up of a specific set of amino acids, and each of those amino acids are then made up of molecules or elements, and each of those have positive and negative charges and specific bonds, and you can get smaller and smaller, and none of that we can actually visually see. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is theory. And because nobody's come up with another theory, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And we're just pluses and minuses made up. And I think about how our bodies are all made up of the same elements and the same proteins and the same things. So when you deconstruct them all, it's just zeros and ones,
right?
Pluses and minuses that then in all these different constellations create these extraordinary things that we couldn't even imagine. Mm-hmm. And then we're only just talking about cells, and then maybe, they turn into tissues, and tissues turn into muscles and organs, and, all the things that make up our body, eyes, ears, the ability to smell, our senses, how we look. Mm-hmm. And then what about the universe and space? Like when you look up there, it's like, oh, those are particles too. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting. One of my projects was, what is the color of your blood? And it was an invitation for folks to look at their own blood under a microscope and take a photograph. Mm-hmm. And these photographs, many of them look like parts like planets. And so this sort of direct link with the macro and the micro, which is what, ephemera was so much about.
Ephemera was the dance that Sophia and I made a couple of years ago. And actually Floor had an influence on, because she introduced us to one of her lab members who analyzed in a certain way some of Mary's drawings that had been given to Sophia and I before she died, and was able to analyze them as, as scientific phenomenon, like proteins being made. So that was, it was a really interesting kind of analysis that we ended up doing some research on how proteins are made and understanding how we might then put that into our bodies as a choreography. So yes, that was like a really interesting sort of side thing that came out of Floor's collaboration with this lab. Yeah.
So she's now Dr. Sara Fresard.
Oh, great.
She just got her PhD.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So you're on the particle level every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you also said that, when it comes down to it, we're all kind of the same on the particle level. Which, I don't know, that seems to have some meaning in and of itself. Do you feel like it has meaning?
Oh, it does. I think we're more similar than we are different, and yet our differences matter and are important. So probably if you would deconstruct you and me, there would be slightly different numbers of the same particles, and that would be if like we're putting the Mary's cube on the horizontal, and we put all the molecules that we're made up of on the horizontal, then we would all have the same things, but there would be different amounts. That's a way that I would, and those amounts, one of them makes up me and the other one makes up you.
Right. Interesting. That would be a cool project.
Actually, it would. Right? We could do that with two beans or something.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, but we don't want to kill anything for it.
Right. Yeah. Maybe two.
If we could deconstruct without
pieces
dying.
Of kale or something.
Yeah.
Sara, and I think you were a part of Dr. Sara, and you, really shared with me these DNA, what do you call them? Like these graphs, right? Mm-hmm. And the DNA being made up of these letters.
Yeah.
And it's really one of the most abstract things I've ever seen, right?
And they're the same letters.
Yeah, and these building blocks of life are just these letters and columns and something. I mean, I still don't fully understand it, but it just seemed to me almost like a made up thing.
Well, each letter stands for a. I wish I knew. I should know what this is called. But it stands for a specific thing. So the letter isn't the DNA. The letter stands for a component of the DNA.
Right.
It must be amino acids.
Like component, amino acids.
So I think T is I should remember these names, but my brain doesn't hold on to this. But I can look it up and find it. But they're actually a code for those specific
The building blocks which are proteins, amino acids.
Right?
Yes,
Because
okay.
proteins are made up of amino acids.
Right.
So it's an amino acid chain, so they are amino acids, and there are specific amino acid combinations for different parts of our DNA.
Right.
Oh, well, so you're made up of genes, with chromosomes, and then those have genes, and those genes have proteins, and those proteins have amino acids, and so then you can list those amino acids. So they're lists, they're codes. And then they look at these codes and look for patterns.
Yes.
And then they, try and figure out what pattern is essential to build in a certain way, and what isn't, and what could we play with to understand better how this set of patterns actually makes something or doesn't make something. So the lab studies how this molecule actually does something to the trypanosome, and how it enters it, and how it, where does it go, and what does it affect, and how does that actual, what they call lysis, that's sort of when it swells and disintegrates, what makes that happen?
Fascinating. And how many years has this lab been studying this parasite? Do you know?
Oh gosh, good question. A long time.
Yeah. And so it doesn't
like
affect...
over 10 years. I mean,
yeah.
I want to say 15 years
15
or
years.
13 years that Jayne has her lab here.
Yeah. And just so we've kind of understand the parasite, it doesn't affect humans, but it does affect
cattle.
Yes.
You do have different kinds of trypanosomes, and some of them do cause human sleeping sickness, but it's a small amount, and the risk is very low. And the African trypanosome that they study here, it affects mainly livestock, and so that's mainly cattle, but actually all sorts of animals can get infected.
This parasite.
Yeah, but because cattle are a huge form of people's livelihood in sub-Saharan Africa, the lab is very invested in finding ways to support farmers to have healthy cattle that are resistant. Not immune. We aren't immune either.
Right.
We're just resistant.
Right.
We have an ability to get rid of these parasites, but not all of them.
Got it.
And the same with cattle. And it's called sleeping sickness.
Sleeping sickness.
Yeah, for humans, and nagana for cattle. But it shifts your sleeping rhythms, your circadian rhythms. So when the parasite enters the brain, and then it starts to then affect your health and everything.
Okay. So there's a real why behind this study.
There is a real why,
Yeah.
and they're in the process. They have been for a long time to create a transgenic cow. So that's a cow that is made out of very specifically curated genes. And they've created a transgenic cow, but they are now want to find ways to have it have the same protective gene. Actually, not a human gene, but a baboon has even better protection for this parasite. So it's a stronger gene. So to insert that gene into the genome of a cow, and then to actually have cows that are resistant to nagana, what the trypanosome causes.
All right. Excellent. How many years out do you think that is? Do you have do they talk about this? Do you feel like
I think their funding stream for that is I don't know. It's they realized, and I think this is actually really interesting. One person was able to actually do the transgenics of the cow and create this cow from these specific genes. And nobody's ever been able to replicate that. So there is a sort of artistry in creating some of these, mixes of genes and creating these not new, but transgenic species that not everybody can do it. There's an art to it. And so
like
the person who
who
did it left, and they did it only once, and people have tried to replicate it. And you would think with the specific score and protocol that you would have enough information to actually do that. Well, it seems that that's not the case. You know,
Interesting.
there are different. There's a actual physical skill set that's required to do that.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it's wow.
That is wow.
Yeah,
And that maybe it is in the details, the particles, the fine.
it's in the particle. It's completely in the particles, and it's in the invisible.
Yeah.
So Jayne speaks about what the lab does is they move invisible bits of liquid around all the time, and you can't. We're so used to seeing things visually, and everything is. You know what's happening by proving it with another thing that shows you the size of something, or that you tag it with something so it fluorescents, and then you can see it under the microscope. So there are all these tricks that, you know, these biologists have developed to understand what's happening, what the mechanisms are.
Yes. I mean, it reminds me a lot of reification, right? You're sort of really in the unknown. You can't see what you're doing. So scientists and artists kind of have that in common.
Yeah.
And then you have to just keep trying things until you get it, and then hope that you can actually bring something back from that space of the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah. And interesting that, I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons why your position is also so exciting. So if scientists can start to understand that what artists doing is a similar process of reification, right?
Yeah.
And that maybe there's something in what you do or something in what they do that, right? Then that transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary way that might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. So let's switch again. We got the in the particles bit, which is fascinating. Technical.
We could do a whole nother.
I know. But you also have like a really vested interest in movement and embodiment. Can you speak a little bit about how that fits into what we've been speaking about, or if it's something else?
I, on a very broad sense, I'm just fascinated by that I am a body, that I'm a living body made up of all these particles, and that's me, and I'm the only one in me, and like you're the only one in you, and that I see things, you know, and that I don't see who's seeing, and it's just wild. Like, what? And I realized that my curiosity, which is, you know, part of the human condition in so many different ways. Many people are we're all trying to figure that out in our different ways. I'm confident I can say all in this. Yeah, some more invested than others, it's my art is really to figure out what it means to be human and what it means to be me. And I learned what I am with others, and I learned what I am in movement. And I think without movement, well, besides that, movement, there's no stillness. That's what I've also come to learn in the lab. Nothing is still. Like everything needs to move to vibrate, to live. So all those little molecules are constantly moving, which is why it's so hard to understand what they're doing, because if you stop them from moving, they're not doing what they do. So then you don't know what they do. Yeah. So how do you understand what they do and still... Anyway, so when we think and they've even discovered that, you know, rocks and deep in the core of the earth, we think that all is solid and, you know, stationary, but all of that is moving. Rocks are moving. So there's the whole idea of movement. There is always movement. And I'm really interested in the connection between the actual physical biology, anatomy of my body, and then of my ability to think and analyze and feel and sense and direct how my body navigates the world. And then to have insights. I've also discovered that through movement I get ideas, and things happen, and that I feel better. Through movement I feel better. And I'm so happy to have found ways to... I thought that movement was only for dancers, right? And I was told at an early age that I wasn't fit to be a dancer. So, you know, I've tried to find other ways to do that. And that's part of the modernist that's a very modernist thing to say. And I now understand that, basketball players can be seen as dancers. It's a choreography, it's a movement, it's a set of steps. There's a set of rules that have been agreed to that instigate how they move around a specific space. And when a dancer friend of mine told me how obsessed he was with how basketball players moved, I was like, oh yeah. So that gave me space to see that, I have my set of movements and that they could be called dance.
Yes, they could. Curses to all the dance teachers out there that say somebody is a dancer or not a dancer.
It's like those art teachers that say you can't draw.
Exactly.
Everyone can draw. Everyone.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how you define what a drawing is or what a dance is.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's really interesting right now to be teaching in higher ed in a location where most of my students have trained in private studios. And so they have a pretty narrow definition of what dance is. And I expanded the dance experience on the campus and invited many people into the dance studio who had been kept from the studio in that modernist way.
Yeah.
And the real challenge of that, which I think the 6 viewpoints points out and complicates so much, is that you were talking about this non-hierarchy, putting, folks' particles on a non-hierarchical just to see how many there are. But in the 6 viewpoints, we have this non-hierarchical possibility where movement is not the most important thing for a dancer, for instance, but it's an equal relationship to space-time, emotion, movement, and story. And that can be very tricky for a dancer who has conflated movement and emotion and maybe story all into one material. And time, that's just what the music is doing. I don't need to think about that anymore. As long as I'm dancing to the music, that's that.
And shape.
Shape, we've learned that in class. We do the shapes we've learned in class, right? So, and any other weird shapes, please don't, right?
Yeah, the ones that I can't do.
Exactly.
And I can't move in time. So then, I'm disqualified.
Exactly. So I've been thinking a lot about how, for those kinds of dancers, doing the 6 viewpoints really almost sort of deconstructs their identity. It's a very scary place for them. Yeah. But for somebody like you or somebody like me who's excited to go beyond that definition of dance, it can be so sort of freeing to say like, I can just be noticing space, and then, my arm just lifted. Okay, this is my dance now. So I am in that sort of predicament at the moment of how do I work in the 6 viewpoints with dancers and not have it feel like I'm deconstructing their identity. Because I do think that many young dancers really identify with being a dancer of a certain kind. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to you.
Well, I think identity is a very interesting point or that I can connect to, given that I'm, my art is a way to figure out what is my identity. And I think through finding Mary Overly's 6 viewpoints, it started I was introduced first to Anne Bogart's 6 viewpoints through Brooklyn.
9 viewpoints.
9 viewpoints. I don't remember what it was. The viewpoints.
Yes.
The viewpoints.
We call them now embodied choice making.
Embodied choice making. And that already I understood from the beginning, maybe not necessarily how it was taught, but I understood how they were relevant at every moment in time and not just on a stage or on a... and I think I understood that because I am not a performer or formally trained as one. And it wasn't used as a tool, it wasn't used as paint on a canvas, because it was used, for me, it was used as to understand myself in time and space in the world. And that it gave me a language that was liberating from all other meaning. You know, not a religious language, not a sort of formal psychological or philosophical language. It was just a thing.
Yeah.
And these are things. And then when I met you, you know, at Earth Dance, and I signed up for your 6 Viewpoints workshop and thought, I know what this is. And then realized, this is very different. And I remember lying with our heads towards each other in a circle, and you describing the body as looking at your own body as a landscape. And not that wouldn't have been, but it was just specific to how you brought it. I was like, this is different. And different in the sense that I think it was much clearer to me that this was I think you call it a technology, but it was an entry point for me into my creative expression as a person. You know, I really believe we are all creative. Nobody's left out in that. And that the 6 Viewpoints gave me ways to open up the expression of my creativity, to take it away from, because I always drew and colored, and so that was a very familiar place for me, but to take it into myself in the world and back into something that I did, you know, in primary school, was perform on stage, you know, and that's sort of on a personal practice level where I'm really now curious to going to. And in many ways, I think it's great that I'm untrained, because
I'm nodding.
Yes. And I'm starting to recognize the nod and go, okay, yeah, that has value. And because what I said earlier, I don't need to prove anything anymore. I'm sure that's a bit of a lie, but I'm trying to hold that space. So like, what if there's freedom? Yeah. What then? What wants to be expressed?
Yeah.
And that's a really exciting question. And I'm very clear that it's in my growing my expression of movement and dance, but it feels a little separate from it won't be separate, because I've integrated movement into a thing in the lab called the Ask a Parasite, where we invite folks into the lab in an embodied way. But that's not my movement, right? Then I'm offering a score that I create with the lab, or a protocol that I call it. And then, you know, we give prompts to folks. But I'm actually interested, well, what's my practice? And I'm interested in it being less private and less in, you know, the classes that I take with you or with Wendell and Erika or with anybody else, but seeing where does it want to live outside of the private practice spaces.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but I had a recent experience where I ended up performing and using all my skills that I've been learning through the Viewpoints and through this work at my dear friend's funeral, and with movement and singing. And with a group of people who were all celebrating and mourning and, you know, in a deep moment of what it is to be human. And it felt so meaningful. And it was transformative. Yeah. It was hugely transformative. And I thought, not that I want to be at a funeral every day, and it will never be like this, because the relationship I have with that person is very specific to what emerged. But I'm interested in it not being separate from what's happening around me in time and space, and that there's this possibility of something new. And maybe we call that transformation, or we call it reification, or I don't know, there's all sorts of words for that. And that the people who are in that space all recognize it, but it could be all different things for all of us. But that there is a thing that is the same. And a little bit like we're all the same, yet we're different in that same way. You know, everybody in the funeral experienced something, but it was all different for us. But yet we were in the same time and space, but the story was all different.
I mean, you're describing this kind of theater, right? Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier today, we went to see Yoko Ono's exhibition at the Park Avenue Armory before we started our podcast. And you were mentioning something along those lines, right? Earlier today, where you're sort of performing
Yeah.
invisible scores.
Yes,
So you might see somebody in New York City performing invisible scores here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe this is a question for you. Like, where is that? When are we performing and when are we not performing? And, what is performance versus everyday life? And does it matter to have that distinction?
Yeah.
And I'm obviously thinking about the piano and, like having an audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I even noticed it now, the minute we know that we're talking for this podcast, my focus shifts. Not that I'm different, not that but there is a different quality in the conversation.
Yes. Yes, that there's a third listener that's not here with us right now, but it's sort of represented through this silver microphone between us. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. When are we performing and when aren't we? One that people get their PhDs about. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So I think the last thing that we'll talk about today is, and it can be more than one thing, but maybe more of the products of your process. So you had an exhibition this past summer at a gallery nearby, and you've also co-written a book chapter on your practice of bringing social practice and movement together, right? So I don't know, do you want to talk about either one of those things? Tell us how this has like manifested into something that the public gets to appreciate.
Yeah. I'll talk about the book first, which really came out of the class that you and I developed together. And the class that was for art educators at Queen's College. And these are art teachers that are already placed in schools and are working. And the class was a social engaged class. And something that you've taught me is to bring in the things that you want to learn.
Yeah.
And I want to continue to learn how to bring this technology of the 6 viewpoints into teaching, and why, intuitively it makes sense to me, but in practice, what does that actually look like? And so I asked you to co-teach with me, and we had a really meaningful journey, and I think it was extraordinary. It wasn't easy, and that's okay. It was a how do you call it? Like a springboard into this space of teaching that I didn't realize how I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed acknowledging that I wanted to learn and creating a space for the learning that you have really modeled for me, and that, has been modeled by Mary, how Mary taught. And that's the place where we get to figure out what we're curious about. And I think for me, movement is a big part of that. It helps me understand it. And so bringing social practice, art, science, and movement into the space together is what the chapter in the book is about, and why that's important. And what we have come up with is really this word transdisciplinary, as opposed to interdisciplinary, where bringing these actually 3 things together, unless you consider social practice interwoven into both of them, that they're a common thing, that it creates something new. And it's clear to me from the experiences that the students shared, because they wrote about what they did and they journaled, and that was part of the class. Reflection is a really important part of it, that they found new ways to access the things that they needed as art teachers.
And you co-wrote it with Susan
McCullough, who's the department head of art education at Queen's College.
And the book's name is?
The book's name is, it has to do with the A in STEAM. So,
right.
We'll give you the formal title and the link to it.
Yeah, we'll put that in the link. But well, STEAM is STEM plus art.
Yes.
Right, and STEM stands for science,
technology, economics, and math.
Yeah.
And so, honestly, I think you can't do that with art. And the theoretical premise to it is really that art as a social practice is important because it brings it helps bring our worlds, our everyday worlds, into the classroom. And those are the things that we care about, even no matter in what discipline we are. And that the social practice art really emphasizes that. And that a lot of scientists don't really get taught how to teach. And so they're actually using they're hungry for techniques of teaching. Higher ed teachers don't get taught how to teach either. So it's K through 12.
Some don't, yeah.
So it's really these K through 12 artists have a specific curriculum that they have to follow.
Yeah.
And so, how do you create space in covering that?
Yeah.
And each of them found different ways to connect to the specific topics and age group that they were into. And, together we really found it was important that it was for them, that it was a support for them, and that they came with their questions that we could then, with what we know, figure out how to answer together.
Yeah.
So that this is this co-creation process where you have an idea, but you don't really know where you're going to go or where you're going to end up. And I like that, because how boring is it to teach the same textbook over and over again? It's like, this is again modern. This is modern. This is right. This is what you have to learn. Yet here something new is created. Yeah. And that's a creative practice.
And also I think that, we'll just say it loud. We'll say it loud for all the skeptics out there. Like, no matter what industry you're going to end up working in, creativity is part of it.
Yeah.
It's how we cope with the world, right? We problem solve, we think critically. And that is something that we develop when we play with each other, when we try to create something out of nothing with each other. And so you can call it theater, you could call it dance, you can call it, social practice, but also, maybe everyone is doing that all the time in all of the high rises behind Floor in New York City, you know what I mean? Right? We are all relational, we are all problem solving, we're all thinking critically, and to be with that in an art setting is like so important. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and then when it gets transferred into whether you're doing economics or biology lab, right, that you bring that with you, because it is human. It's just human. Yeah. Humanities. Wait, hold on.
Exactly. And art and science, was never separate until modernism. I'm making this up a little bit, but my sense is modernism separated it.
Yes, I mean, as things get more specialized, they actually get more separate, which is different from deconstruction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we are in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, right? So it's under the Dean of Arts and Sciences. So it's in Hunter College, it's under this umbrella, but yet these worlds don't come together. I mean, the different sciences don't come together. I mean, biology doesn't really know what chemistry is doing. And
unless
then
you're biochemistry.
Unless you're biochemistry. But even then, even the labs within the biology department don't really know what each other is doing. Right. And that's not unusual in academia. I mean, that's the way it has sort of grown.
Yeah, so just to point out that, like, Floor, who identifies at least partially as a postmodernist, isn't in the business of separating things, is actually in the business of connecting things. So herein lies a really interesting conundrum.
Yes.
If you think postmodernism is actually about the separation of things, and here we are telling you just the opposite. It's actually about making connections. And I would totally agree with you. Yeah. It's just about being able to see more so that you can start to see even more connections or make even more connections.
Yeah. And discover more.
And
Right, discover.
See how much possibility we live in, actually. Yeah.
And in one of those classes, we had I taught a second class at Hunter College for the Hunter Honors Program, and we had such a confined space, but there was so much possible in that space, even though we thought it wasn't possible. So, everything is right. There's something in everything, even though it may not be what we want.
That's the key.
And just to say, you asked me about the collective fabric, and I think it relates to this making connections but still separating. And the collective fabric, the microbiome, is a project that I started before I joined Hunter College as an artist in residence in the biology department. But it was through the connection of the biology department that I got into the microbiome, because I learned about what it is. And so these microbes are the extraordinary organisms that live on us and in us. And they're microscopic, so we can't see them. That's why they're micro. And they're made up of bacteria and viruses and funguses. The viruses are really small, so we generally don't really see them. But they're there. And they make up more cells in our body than our own cells. They don't even know how many there are. They're trying to quantify, because we humans constantly want to quantify. And I think the numbers keep increasing. Right. So it was 2/3 more, and then it's like 3/4 more. Or
Yeah.
And
so we're complicating again this idea of what I am, by adding in all this. That's very Buddhist. Maybe it's like maybe I am this body, but maybe this body is also lots of other.
Yeah.
A home to so many other things.
Yeah.
Are they my body? Are they me too?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not just me. Wait, what? Wait, what?
Yes, exactly. And that's a big part of the project, is to have these questions come up and to consider these things. And what the project really does is to visualize these microbes by growing them on large petri dishes with food for them, which is made up of sort of a set of proteins, which is called agar, which is made from seaweed. And these are sort of, all labs use these proteins to grow cells, so it's a very common thing. And they design them specifically for their cells. So we take a general agar, and we put our skin microbes just by touching the agar with your parts of your skin, or using a swab, like a cotton wool, and then rubbing that on a part of your body that you're curious about, and then you put the swab on the agar in the plate, and then over a course of 3 days it will start to grow, because it will get food, and the colonies will grow of these. Mainly the bacteria are easy to see, and then the funguses, and then you have we make a giant petri dish of 3 feet by 3 feet, and the idea is that we grow our fabrics collectively of microbes, so that in this exhibition, and we've been doing this for 5 years since I joined the lab, where actually Sara Fresard was really interested in science and communication and wanted to work with this project, and that's how it sort of turned into the beginning of a collective where we invited other folks, scientists who were part of the lab, teaching, scientists who are undergrads, grads at different levels in their careers, to join and to figure out how we can bring these ideas of microbes into classrooms. So there's a lot more to say about that. But the essence of it is that these are such important parts of our body that keep us healthy. They are critical for not just our physical health, but our mental and our emotional health. And, many of you know about your gut microbiome, which is the biggest part, but we didn't really focus on that because that's a part that lives without oxygen. And so, our gut, it has no oxygen in it. And so they grow in a very specific environment. So they're very hard to grow. So that's why we stick to the ones that grow with oxygen. So that's everything in your skin, and they're all different landscapes and environments. So your inside your ears is very different to on your cheeks, and each pore of your skin has its own unique colony of microbes. Even though they look the same, they're different. And so this work we've understood better and better what the microbiome is, because of the ability to sequence, going back to DNA, because of the ability to map out all those amino acids. We can see that one pore of the skin is different to the other because that code is slightly different. Yeah. But they all have in common that they have, my microbes have a bit of my DNA in it, a bit of code Floor, and your microbes have a bit of code Deborah.
I feel like I understand the DNA even better now.
So the importance of that
took me 5 years.
5 years. I think it's just an ongoing learning process, but I I thought I understood it, and every time I try and explain it, I realize I don't understand it, even though I'm around this language, all the time.
I mean, most good things, I think, take a long time to understand, I hope.
So these microbes are collaborators in our body, and what we really wanted to mirror with the collective is that we collaborate as a group and work together as a group and give each other what we need to grow, and not everybody needs the same things. And so to create a culture of collaboration where there is space to ask for what you need, to step in and step out in the way that works for you. Very similar to how I feel your classes have been, where, show up, be here because you want to be here. And if you have something more important to do, go and do that, and there's so few spaces where there's freedom, where we feel the freedom. I think we can take it more and more, but we're not taught to take it. And we're not taught to think about what we need.
Right.
And we just think about all these things that are strategies that we do.
Yeah. And, again, teaching in higher ed, that's another place where there's potential to start to teach people that. And yet, you have to be there every day. Yeah. Which, is understandable, but also understanding that maybe you can show up differently every day. Yeah. And that is definitely maybe a different way of being in the world than when you were in elementary or high school even.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's a metaphor for really, the microbiome is a metaphor for the importance of diversity. And yet it's all the same, but it's all different. And this is a clear dialectic, to use a fancy term, but, this contradiction in everything, which is actually really exciting, that is a contradiction. Because it means it's not binary, it's like...
Well, at the particle level, right?
It actually is.
Contradiction. So, of course, that's going to manifest in larger objects. Yeah. Us.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And then the ability to be homogenous is actually against nature, isn't it?
Oh, we'd die.
Yes.
We'd die if we were all the same.
Exactly.
We wouldn't exist. So this idea that we have to all be the same is counter to our success. And our so it's just insane that there's, particularly now, this sort of push for these people have to be with these people, but we're better off mixing and learning and growing together.
Yeah, and creating maybe more spaces. Yeah. So that difference can really flourish the way it needs to flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems like a pretty good place to end, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, I think we've covered a lot. So
we covered so much. Yeah. Such a pleasure to talk to you. I hope anyone out there listening that you look Floor up and get inspired by all the things that she's been doing in the world and all of these connections, that she's making between disciplines, and also how she's hopefully been really influenced by the 6 viewpoints and how the
not hopefully.
Yeah, well, I'm humble, so.
Oh, Deborah.
She's definitely been influenced by the 6 viewpoints.
Just so that you all know,
those ideas.
Deborah has been life-changing. Meeting Deborah and working with Deborah has been life-changing for me. So I know that you're humble, but I'm going to, in this formal space where the third entity is listening, thank you for really sharing this work with me, and continuing to work and collaborate and think and, make and I don't know, all the things that we do and may continue and will continue to do in different forms. And I'm so grateful because you're giving me space to express myself in ways that I had pushed away, and that's exciting.
If you liked this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel.